years of racing,
I don't...
On you to become a race driver.
You know, Dan... Everybody's got that one thing that makes them happy. And for me, it's terrifying, terrifying blazing speed. One at a time, please.
Theo!
Yes, the handsome fellow in the back.
What are you doing?
What I've always done. Stay focused. Try to run my race. That's all any driver can do. Next question.
Can you please go to sleep? We've got... work tomorrow.
Sleep? Are you kidding me? It takes hours to come down after a big race like this.
Yeah, I bet. Okay.
They are the fuel that keeps me running.
Absolutely. I can create a 100,000-word cinematic novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013, expanding on the characters, world-building, emotions, and action with richly detailed narration. To get started, I'll write Chapter 1 for you now, and we can continue chapter by chapter. Turbo, 2013, a novel-style retelling. Chapter 1, The Dream Beneath the Shell. Under the heat of a smog-streaked California sky, a tomato garden simmered quietly behind the suburban fences of Van Nuys. It was a world full of order and routine, a slow, sun-drenched rhythm where life crawled, literally. In the heart of this garden, tucked between rows of plump fruit and twisty green vines, lived a snail named Theo. But if you asked him, he'd tell you his name was Turbo. To the other snails, Theo was an oddity, a misfit who refused to crawl within the lines. While they slowly munched their way through leaves and gossiped about rain forecasts and fertilizer blends, Theo dreamed of speed. Not snail speed. Not even squirrel speed. Real, bone-rattling, tire-scorching speed. The kind of speed that belonged on racetracks with fire trailing from engines and crowds screaming in the bleachers. By day, Theo worked in the tomato plant snail crew, grinding through shifts with soul-sucking predictability. His supervisor, Chet, who also happened to be his brother, never missed an opportunity to snap Theo back to reality. "Face it, Theo," Chet muttered one morning as they lined up for another patrol through the vine rows. "You're a snail. You're supposed to be slow. It's what we are. It's what we do." But Theo wasn't listening. His eyes were glued to a rusted TV set perched on a windowsill inside the gardener's house, broadcasting the latest footage of the Indianapolis 500. The roar of engines leaked through the open screen. Theo's heart thumped to the rhythm of a turbocharged symphony. And there, glorious and untouchable, was the champion of champions, Guy Gagne. The crowd's roar, the shimmer of his golden helmet, the way he lifted his arms like a god touched down to earth. Theo's breath caught. "I will be fast," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with impossible hope. In a world built for patience and caution, Turbo was about to rewrite everything. But first, the impossible had to happen. And in Van Nuys, California, sometimes it did. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 2? Great. Here is Chapter 1 of the 100,000-word cinematic novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013, written entirely in my own words with rich narration, character depth, and expanded storytelling. Turbo, 2013, a novel-style retelling. Chapter 1, The Dream Beneath the Shell. The California sun poured down like melted gold, coating every leaf, vine, and garden gnome in its sleepy, sweltering glow. Deep in the backyard of a modest home in Van Nuys, the garden buzzed with its usual rhythms, ants marching in tidy lines, bees hovering like helicopters over pollen-packed petals, and tomatoes ripening with slow, deliberate confidence. This was the world as it had always been, quiet, patient, predictable. For the snails who lived here, life was not a race. It was a slow, calculated crawl from leaf to leaf, day after day, forever. But Theo was different. Theo was a snail, yes, squishy, shelled, and no more than a few inches from eye stalk to tail. But inside that tiny body burned the heart of a racer. While others spent their days calculating the ripeness of tomatoes and navigating the safest routes around garden tools, Theo would stare off into the distance, dreaming of tracks paved in asphalt and engines that screamed like thunder. He wasn't just dreaming of going fast. He believed he was fast. Believed it in the marrow of his shell. He had a routine. Every morning, long before the others stirred, Theo would sneak to the edge of the fence and perch himself beneath an open window. Inside, a dusty television hummed to life, broadcasting yesterday's highlights from the Indianapolis 500. Theo watched, mesmerized, as sleek cars flew by in a blur of color and flame. He didn't just watch, he memorized, studied, inhaled every turn, every roar, every victory lap. And always, front and center, was Guy Gagne. The human racer was a legend. Charismatic, fearless, and adored by millions, Guy wasn't just a champion. He was the embodiment of speed. And to Theo, he wasn't just a hero. He was a blueprint. Every time Guy raised that golden helmet toward the crowd, every time he shouted his mantra, "No dream is too big, and no dreamer too small," Theo felt it. Like a spark in dry grass, it caught fire in his mind. But not everyone was impressed. "Again with the racing," groaned Chet, Theo's older brother, as he slithered up beside him one morning. His voice was heavy with exhaustion and something else. Worry, maybe. "You know we've got a full patrol today. 2 rows of tomatoes to check for mites. Real work." Theo didn't look away from the screen. "Did you see that drift? He took that turn at over 200 miles an hour." Chet sighed and adjusted his glasses. "We're snails, Theo. 200 millimeters an hour would break your shell. Come back to Earth." But Theo was already gone. In his mind, he was roaring down a track, fire trailing from his non-existent wheels, crowds screaming his name. Later that day, as the tomato plant snail crew assembled in formation beneath the shade of a hosepipe, Theo struggled to focus. Chet gave the daily assignments with military precision, but Theo's attention drifted skyward. A plane traced a silver line across the sky. Theo squinted at it, imagining it was him, a blur in the clouds. Predictably, Theo messed up his patrol. He tried to reenact a pit stop using a soda bottle cap and ended up crashing into a ripe tomato, splattering juice all over a cluster of horrified workers. "You're a danger to the crew," barked Chet, as red pulp dripped from his shell. "You're not a racer, Theo. You're not fast. You're not built for it. You're built for this, slow, careful, garden life." But the words bounced off Theo like raindrops. That night, under the glow of the moon and the faint hum of traffic in the distance, he climbed to the top of a sprinkler head and looked out beyond the yard. Somewhere out there were tracks waiting to be raced, records waiting to be broken, and a world that didn't care how slow you started, as long as you dared to go fast. And Theo would go fast. He didn't know how. He didn't know when. But somehow, someway, he would become Turbo. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 2? Absolutely. Let me explain the deeper narrative elements and expand on the themes and character dynamics of Chapter 2 from this novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013. #magnifying glass tilted left. What happens in Chapter 2? Chapter 2 builds the emotional and thematic foundation of the story. It's about conflict between dreams and reality. We see how Theo, who calls himself Turbo, continues to rebel against the slow-paced, routine-bound world of the snail colony, especially under the watchful eye of his brother, Chet, who is the embodiment of caution, tradition, and grounded reality. Here's a breakdown. #snail character conflict. Theo versus Chet. Theo is portrayed as a dreamer, a visionary trapped in the wrong body and the wrong life. He doesn't just want more, he needs more. He's addicted to the thrill of speed, even if it's completely irrational for a snail. Chet, his older brother, loves him but sees Theo's dreams as dangerous. He's not trying to be cruel, he's trying to protect him. He represents society's voice that says, be realistic. Stay safe. This sibling dynamic mirrors a common emotional truth. The person closest to us often becomes the biggest obstacle when they fear for our safety more than they believe in our vision. Seedling the garden as a symbol. The tomato garden is more than a setting. It's a symbol of limitation and small thinking. Everything there is orderly, repetitive, and centered on survival. For most snails, this is enough. But for Theo, the garden feels like a prison. When Theo climbs the leaf to look at the sunset, it's symbolic. He's literally rising above the place where everyone else is content to crawl. That physical height represents his mindset. He's looking beyond the horizon. Direct hit thematic layers introduced. 1. Dreams versus reality. Theo dreams of becoming something impossible. Chet represents realism and fear. This tug-of-war between hope and safety is a core theme. 2. Identity. Theo has renamed himself Turbo, which is already a declaration of who he wants to be, not who the world says he is. Identity is a choice for him, not an inheritance. 3. Alienation. We also see how the snail community laughs at him behind his back. He's a joke, an outcast. This reinforces how society mocks what it doesn't understand, especially those who dare to be different. Collision ending hint. The storm is coming. The chapter ends with a prophetic line. What Theo didn't know was that destiny, loud, violent, and fast, was already racing toward him. This is setting up the supernatural or sci-fi event that will transform Theo into Turbo in the literal sense, when he gains his powers. It's a narrative beat of foreshadowing, hinting that his entire world is about to be turned upside down. Would you like me to move forward with Chapter 3, where that transformation begins? Certainly. Here's a more detailed explanation of Chapter 2, expanding on the emotional arcs, world building, and narrative purpose of this chapter in the novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013. Clapperboard overview of Chapter 2, Cracks in the Shell. This chapter focuses on the growing divide between Theo, Turbo, and his brother Chet, and how Theo begins to truly question the limits of his life as a snail. It sets up the central theme of transformation and introduces the idea that Theo is no longer satisfied simply dreaming. He's now acting on those dreams, even when it means risking everything. Snail key themes expanded. 1. The friction between safety and ambition. Chet represents caution, structure, and survival. He's not cruel, he's scared. He wants to protect Theo from a world that he believes will crush dreamers. Theo is pulled in the opposite direction. He doesn't want safety. He wants more. He believes life is meant to be lived at full throttle, even if that comes with danger. 2. Theo's first true rebellion. When Theo sneaks out to the front yard, it marks a major turning point. This is his first real act of rebellion. He's no longer just dreaming, he's testing the boundaries. The sensory descriptions, muscle car, barking dog, garden sprinkler, heighten the stakes and physicality of his choice. Theo's world is now expanding. 3. A taste of adrenaline and fear. Asterisk the experience of nearly getting attacked by a dog, and then being flung through the air, gives him his first physical experience of speed. Asterisk though terrifying, he calls it worth it. This shows how deeply committed he is to his dream, and how far he'll go for it. ##### Globe showing Europe-Africa world-building details. Asterisk the Van Nuys neighborhood is shown in layers. The back garden, slow, safe, structured, and the front yard/street, fast, chaotic, unpredictable. This contrast lays the groundwork for Theo's eventual departure. Asterisk we begin to sense that there is an entire world beyond the tomato garden, and that Theo may be destined to enter it. #### Red Heart, emotional depth. Asterisk Theo's frustration. He's tired of being underestimated, tired of being told who he is. The longing in his voice is real. He feels stuck in a world too small for the dreams bursting out of him. Asterisk Chet's fear. He's not just dismissing Theo out of pride, he's genuinely afraid of losing his brother. Chet's scolding comes from love, not control. Asterisk Theo's isolation. Even surrounded by others, Theo is emotionally alone. The only thing that understands him is the sound of engines in the distance, and the stars above. ### Shooting Star Foreshadowing. The final lines of Chapter 2 point toward something big and unseen approaching. Theo hears the world answer him through a distant engine, a metaphor that his destiny is drawing nearer. Something was coming. Something that would change everything. This foreshadows the supernatural event that will take place soon, the nitrous oxide accident, and push Theo into his transformation into Turbo. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 3, or would you like this style of deeper explanation for later chapters too? Certainly. Here's the next installment of the 100,000-word cinematic novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013. Chapter 3. The Night That Changed Everything. It began like any other night, still, humid, and thick with the smell of ripe tomatoes and damp soil. The garden was asleep. Even the cicadas had quieted, their droning replaced by the gentle murmur of sprinklers hissing in the distance. The moon cast silver puddles of light across the leaves, and in the shadows of the vine rows, a lone snail moved against the current of slowness. Theo. He glided away from the colony, his eyes wide with hunger, not for food, but for something else, something electric. The day's argument with Chet still echoed in his shell, but it only made him more determined. He couldn't explain it, but something in the air felt charged, a storm without clouds. As he crawled across the lawn and past the fence, the lights of the human world shimmered like distant galaxies. It was forbidden territory for a snail. Cars, machines, predators, accidents. Danger lurked with every breeze. But Theo didn't flinch. He pressed forward, following the sound of something far more hypnotic than common sense. Engines. Beyond the fences and shrubbery, past a forgotten alley behind a taco stand, Theo discovered a world he never knew existed. A concrete lot littered with cones and barricades, and cars. Not just any cars. Street racers. Sleek, glowing beasts, lined up beneath floodlights, engines purring like dragons. A group of humans, mostly young, wild-eyed and loud, circled the machines, cheering and yelling as the races kicked off. To Theo, it was paradise. He inched closer, crawling up the rim of an overturned trash bin to get a better view. His eyes stretched toward the racers, his heart pounding in time with the revving engines. Then, asterisk boom. Asterisk. Two cars blasted forward, tires squealing, exhausts blazing neon blue. They vanished into the night like comets, and the crowd erupted. Theo could hardly breathe. This was it. This was what he was meant for. Caught up in the thrill, he didn't notice the nitrous oxide canister being wheeled toward the track. One of the racers, a tall man in a leather vest, was rigging his engine for the next run, boosting it far beyond legal limits. Theo, curious, crawled toward the setup, drawn to the strange blue glow pulsing inside the tank. He climbed onto the engine block, unaware of the danger below. Then it happened. The racer jumped into his car, started the ignition, and hit the throttle. Theo slipped, asterisk and fell asterisk right into the air intake valve star. He didn't even have time to scream. The world exploded into light and suction and noise. A cyclone of mechanical fury swallowed him whole. The nitrous oxide blasted into the engine and through every vent, hose, and duct, and Theo was in the middle of it. Blue lightning danced across his shell. His body convulsed, every cell screaming as molecular bonds shattered and reformed. His DNA cracked like glass and reknitted itself into something new. Something impossible. Inside that machine, screaming through metal, fire, and speed, *** Turbo was born ***. Then, silence. The car screeched to a halt. The racer got out, shouting, "What the hell was that?" Smoke billowed from the engine. Nobody noticed the small, glowing snail that tumbled out of the exhaust pipe and landed hard on the asphalt. Theo lay motionless. His shell flickered with faint blue light. His body pulsed like it had swallowed a storm. His mind drifted, lost in static and engine roars. And somewhere deep in his altered cells, something stirred. Speed. Would you like to continue with Chapter 4, where Theo awakens and begins to discover his new powers? Absolutely. Here's Chapter 3 of the cinematic novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013, continuing from where we left off, with rich narration, deep emotional layers, and vivid scene-building. Turbo, 2013, a novel-style retelling. Chapter 3, A Snail in the Machine. The garden was quiet, its usual rustle of snail shells and whispered gossip dulled by the thick weight of early morning fog. Dew clung to tomato leaves like glassy tears, and the sky hovered in a sleepy blue-gray. Somewhere in the distance, a leaf-blower screamed like a wounded beast, but in the garden, all was still. Theo was already gone. He hadn't told Chet. He hadn't told anyone. He'd simply left before dawn, slipping once more through the fence and crawling into the world beyond, toward the pulsing hum of the freeway and the promise of speed. His shell clinked softly against sidewalk grit as he climbed a cracked curb. Each inch felt like a mile, and yet his heart thundered with a single word: faster. Theo found himself near a tired old strip mall, its neon signs flickering even in daylight. One of the buildings, gray, graffiti-tagged, and low to the ground, seemed to buzz with life. A strange sound spilled out into the air, a mixture of engines revving, people shouting, and music pounding like a heartbeat on the verge of bursting. It was a garage, though not the kind that fixed cars. This one raced them. In the alley behind it, a group of humans gathered around two souped-up cars facing each other like bulls ready to charge. The drivers, young, cocky, fire-eyed, revved their engines as a crowd circled in. Theo crept closer, ducking behind a discarded soda cup. He could barely contain his awe. The noise, the heat, the rumble of anticipation. And then, it began. Rubber screamed against asphalt. Tires spun into smoke. The two cars lunged forward with raw, animalistic fury, like rockets freed from chains. Theo's eye stalks swiveled as he tracked them down the alley, his heart hammering like a piston. He was trembling, not with fear, but with need. He had to be part of this. He inched closer. Too close. One of the racers pulled back into the lot and skidded to a stop, inches from the storm drain Theo had crawled into. The ground shook. Theo lost his grip. With a sharp slip, he tumbled, shell first, into the drain below. Darkness swallowed him. He fell through a tunnel of concrete and rusted metal, spinning and sliding until he landed hard on a wet pipe. He groaned, dazed. Everything smelled like old oil and city runoff. That's when he saw it. Glowing blue. A thin trail of light slithered through the darkness like liquid fire, coming from a pipe that hissed and vibrated with power. Nitrous oxide. N2O. A leaky canister, tossed carelessly from one of the modded street racers, had spilled into the underground system. Theo crawled toward it, drawn by its impossible glow. The light reflected in his eyes, electric and alive. One drop, just one, fell from above. It landed on his shell. And then, everything exploded. The world shattered into light. Theo's body arched backward. His muscles locked. His eyes bulged. His heart stuttered, then roared back to life with terrifying speed. Blue fire licked across his shell, racing in patterns like circuitry. His DNA unraveled and rethreaded itself in an instant. His blood, thick and sluggish, became something else. Something faster. The nitrous oxide surged through him, dragging his consciousness through blinding memories, visions of car races, engines combusting, pistons firing, tires melting. Speed. Not imagined, not dreamed. Felt. Every nerve in his body screamed. And then, silence. Theo lay in the drain, motionless. His shell flickered with a faint blue pulse. Smoke drifted from the grooves in his back. His eyes fluttered open. The world was different. Sharper. Brighter. Faster. He gasped. It echoed like thunder in his ears. His heart was still racing. Literally. It sounded like a drumline inside him. He looked down at his body, blinking in confusion. He felt different. His tendrils quivered. His shell was warm. Charged. And then, on instinct, he moved. But not like before. This time, he blurred. He zipped forward, 5 feet, in a blink, colliding with the edge of a grate. He screamed. What? He'd just moved faster than any snail in history. He turned. Tried again. Another burst. Zip. And he crashed into a Pepsi can. His eyes widened. Theo gasped. Then he smiled. I'm fast, he whispered. I'm actually fast. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just dreaming of speed. He was speed. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 4? Here's Chapter 4 of the 100,000-word cinematic novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013. Chapter 4. The Awakening. Theo's world was darkness. There were no stars above him, no hum of the garden, no gentle rustle of leaves. Only a void of quiet emptiness. Then, a sudden jolt. His body shot upright, and for a split second, he thought he had died. But then his shell caught the light, and his senses exploded in a chaotic rush. He was no longer just Theo. He was something else, something faster. The first thing he noticed was the ground beneath him. It looked different. Not just different in the way a snail might see things up close, but magnified. The cracks in the pavement were sharp, jagged, and impossibly detailed, like they were waiting to trip him up. But he didn't trip. No. Instead, he surged forward, his tiny legs becoming a blur of motion, like his body was somehow connected to the very air itself. He zipped across the parking lot. Faster than he had ever gone before. His thoughts barely kept up with his speed, but the rush was intoxicating. Speed. It was freedom. It was power. He didn't know how it happened, how a simple fall into the engine's air intake could have transformed him into this. But in that moment, none of it mattered. Nothing else existed but the feeling of air rushing past his tiny body, the pavement beneath him turning into a slick ribbon that he could tear through without even thinking. Theo didn't have time to process his thoughts fully. He was already speeding toward the edge of the lot, his shell humming with energy. He was faster than he had ever dreamed. Faster than anything else. And then, just as quickly as the speed had come, it was gone. He skidded to a halt at the edge of the lot, nearly flying into a pile of discarded tires. His heart thudded in his chest. His breath came in ragged gasps. He stared at his trembling body, trying to understand what had just happened. This wasn't possible. Snails didn't go that fast. Nobody went that fast. But there it was. A feeling of power, of potential, of something more than he could have ever imagined. Before he could comprehend it fully, a voice cut through the air. Hey, you're that snail. The one from the race. Theo froze, his shell still glowing faintly with the remnants of the nitrous surge. He turned his head slowly, and there, standing in the dim light, was the racer, the same one who had been behind the wheel when everything had gone wrong, when everything had changed. He was staring down at Theo, wide-eyed, his mouth hanging open in disbelief. He took a few steps forward, crouching down to get a closer look. "You're fast," he muttered, his voice tinged with awe. "What the hell happened to you?" Theo didn't know how to answer. He barely understood what had happened himself. The man looked over his shoulder at the other racers, who were starting to gather around. "Hey, guys! Look at this!" he shouted, his voice growing excited. "You gotta see this!" Theo, still panting and dazed, wanted to retreat back into the safety of the garden. He wanted to hide. But the thrill of speed still buzzed in his veins, and the people around him were staring at him with a mix of awe and excitement. In their eyes, He wasn't just a snail anymore. He was something extraordinary. "I don't know what happened," the racer said, bending down to eye level with Theo. "But I think we've got ourselves a real racer here." For the first time in his life, Theo didn't feel like an outcast. He didn't feel like a joke. He felt seen. The idea of being a racer, not just any snail, but a competitor in a real race, flashed through his mind like a bolt of lightning. It was everything he had dreamed of. Before he could react further, the racer scooped him up carefully, cradling him in his palm. "Let's get you somewhere safe," the racer said, his voice softer now, as he walked toward the nearest garage. The others followed behind, murmuring among themselves. Inside the dimly lit garage, Theo's senses began to return to him. The walls hummed with the distant sound of engines revving. The scent of motor oil and gasoline filled the air. He could hear the racers talking, but his thoughts were still tangled with everything that had happened, how his body had shifted, how he had become something new. Something fast. "What are you going to do with me?" Theo finally asked, his voice small but determined. The racer looked down at him, his expression serious. "I don't know. But I think I'm going to call you Turbo." The name hit Theo like a thunderclap. It was perfect. Turbo. Not Theo, not the timid snail from the garden, but a whole new identity. A racer. A champion. His heart skipped a beat. Turbo. It was a name he had only whispered to himself in the quiet of the garden. And now it was his. It was who he was meant to be. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 5, where Turbo begins to embrace his new identity and takes his first steps into the world of racing? Absolutely. Here's Chapter 4 of the novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013, continuing from the dramatic transformation Theo undergoes. Turbo, 2013, a novel-style retelling. Chapter 4, Breaking the Speed Limit. The alleyway spun around Theo like a kaleidoscope. He was dizzy from the speed, overwhelmed by the flood of adrenaline coursing through his veins. His body trembled with the echoes of that first, mind-bending sprint. He had barely even thought about moving, it just happened. But now, standing still, Theo could feel the tug of something new inside him, an energy that could hardly be contained. He took another deep breath, his heart racing wildly in his chest, and then, without warning, he pushed off. A blur of motion. The world stretched before him as his muscles fired in perfect synchrony. He zipped across the ground in a single pulse of speed, his shell almost glowing with that strange, ethereal blue light. He slammed into the side of a discarded cardboard box, ricocheted off it, and found himself skimming the pavement like a rocket shot out of a cannon. Theo could hear the hum of his own movement, like wind in his ears. It was almost a song, this rhythm, this pulse, faster than he'd ever dreamed, faster than he ever knew was possible. He didn't know how it worked. He didn't care. All he knew was that this was what he'd been meant for. This was his purpose. He wasn't just Theo, the slow-moving snail anymore. He was something else. Something faster. His first true instinct was to push himself even harder. This time, he didn't crash into anything. No, this time, he moved as though the earth itself were part of him. The pavement rolled beneath him like he was gliding, faster than the wind, faster than any creature could be. His legs blurred, his body a streak of motion, darting between cracks in the pavement, dodging the jagged edges of broken bottles, the folds of old newspapers. He barely noticed the world around him, the cars, the littered streets, the rain clouds gathering above. All he saw was the path ahead, rushing toward him like it was his destiny. He didn't hear the screeching tires, didn't hear the shout of a man as he looked up from the garage nearby. And then, without thinking, Theo made a sharp turn. The world became a streak of colors. The streetlights blurred into glowing lines, the pavement a blur beneath him. He was completely lost in the speed. Lost in the rush. Lost in the dream. But there was one thing that cut through the rush. The unmistakable sound of laughter. "Whoa, look at that, guys!" Theo skidded to a halt, narrowly avoiding a trash bin that nearly clipped him. He turned slowly, eyes wide, still panting from the rush. It wasn't just him, was it? A small crowd of people had gathered by the curb, watching in amazement. They were staring at him, staring at a snail star. But Theo wasn't just any snail now. He was Turbo. He didn't care what they saw. He had already outpaced everything except the nagging voice that told him it was too much. But he didn't listen. Not anymore. "Hey, you okay, buddy?" one of the onlookers, a gruff man with a cigarette dangling from his lips, asked. Theo blinked, then rolled over on his back, righting himself with ease. His shell sparkled like a jewel in the light. His heart thumped erratically, but it felt right. "I'm fine," Theo said, his voice calm but filled with that same energy that hummed inside him. He looked around, seeing more people gathering, their phones now out, capturing the moment. For a brief, fleeting moment, he felt like the king of this chaotic, frantic world. The excitement was short-lived, though. Before Theo could do another lap or test the limits of his newfound speed, a deep voice boomed behind him. "Hey! What are you doing, Snail?" Theo whipped around, startled. A truck had pulled up behind him, the headlights blinding. It was an old van, rusting along its edges, with a faded logo of a speedway team plastered across the side. The driver stepped out. He was tall, scruffy, with dark sunglasses and a crooked smile. He wore a mechanic's jumpsuit, and his thick, grease-stained gloves looked like they could break stone. "Are you lost or something?" the man asked, as though it was absurd that a snail would even think of being here, in the midst of these human street racers. For a brief moment, Theo felt a pang of panic. He had no idea who this guy was or what was about to happen. Could he still run away if he had to? Could he outrun this man? But then something inside him shifted. Something more than speed. A feeling, a deep, fierce confidence. Theo stood up tall, meeting the man's gaze with defiance. "I'm not lost," he said, his voice steady. "I'm here to race." The man blinked in surprise, his mouth falling open. "Oh, really?" he asked, clearly not sure whether to laugh or stare in disbelief. "A snail, racing?" Theo felt the eyes of the crowd on him, waiting, watching. The sound of street engines revving, the smell of burnt rubber and gasoline, all of it surged through him. He could feel the heat of the moment. And he knew this was his moment. He didn't need to answer that question. He already was racing. The very air hummed with his purpose. "I'll show you," Theo said, already pulling his body into position, prepared to zoom across the asphalt, the streetlights casting long shadows behind him. The crowd fell silent. With a deep breath, Theo closed his eyes and then, shot forward. In a single heartbeat, Theo blurred across the ground, a streak of lightning in the night. The world was his racetrack now. Nothing could hold him back. The crowd erupted into stunned applause, their voices fading as Theo pushed himself even harder, his thoughts only on the speed that called to him, the dream that had come true. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 5? Here's Chapter 5 of the 100,000-word cinematic novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013. Chapter 5, The Fast Lane. Turbo had never been this alive. He could feel the hum of the engine in the air, vibrating through his shell. The garage was alive with the chatter of people, the clink of tools, and the distant roar of race cars firing up outside. But all of that faded into a blur as he focused on the one thing that mattered now, the undeniable rush coursing through him. The man who had rescued him, the street racer, crouched down beside him, adjusting his grip. "You okay, Turbo?" he asked, his voice soft and uncertain. Turbo blinked. For a moment, he was disoriented. He was so used to the slow, plodding pace of life in the garden, where every movement was a calculated effort. But now, he felt something new, something foreign and exhilarating. It wasn't just speed. It was freedom. The kind of freedom he had always yearned for. "I'm fine," he managed to say, his voice steady despite the excitement that buzzed inside him. The racer smiled. "Good to hear. You're gonna need all your wits about you. You've got the potential, but it's a whole new world out there." Turbo shifted slightly, testing his new abilities. He could feel the energy pulsing beneath his shell, his body still crackling with the remnants of the nitrous surge that had changed him. His legs trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from the sheer excitement of being on the edge of something. Something massive. He was in a place where anything was possible. And the thought thrilled him. The other racers were now gathered around, their eyes wide with a mix of skepticism and wonder. They watched as the man set Turbo down on the workbench, inspecting him closely. "You sure about this?" one of the racers asked, glancing at Turbo. "I mean, he's just a snail." "No," the man who had found him replied, his voice firm. "He's not just a snail. He's something else. Something new. I've never seen anything like him." The group exchanged uncertain glances, but nobody spoke out further. They had seen crazier things in the world of street racing, but nothing quite like this. Turbo, still slightly dazed, watched the humans around him. They didn't know what it was like to feel this, to feel unstoppable, and for the first time, Turbo realized that maybe that was what had been missing in his life all along. The humans thought they were fast. They thought they could race. But now, he knew what real speed was. It was in his blood, in his heart, in his very shell. The man who had taken him in looked down at him again, the spark of excitement returning to his eyes. "Turbo," he said, "I know a race tomorrow night. It's a big one. But if you're ready, really ready, I want you to join. Show them what you can do." Turbo's pulse quickened. The challenge was real now. The dream was closer than ever. His eyes locked on the road outside, the distant hum of racing engines like a call to arms. He didn't know if he was fully prepared. He didn't know if his body would hold up. But one thing he did know was that he was no longer afraid. He had no reason to be. He was ready. And for the first time, his dreams felt within reach. The next evening, Turbo was on the starting line, his legs trembling with anticipation. The air was thick with the sound of revving engines and the roar of the crowd. This was it, the moment he had dreamed about for as long as he could remember. No more hiding, no more pretending. This was his time. He looked around, taking in the other racers. Some of them were humans, some were modified vehicles. But all of them had one thing in common: speed. They were ready to leave everything behind and push themselves to the limit. And there, at the front of the pack, was Turbo. His small frame barely noticeable compared to the giant, roaring machines, but it didn't matter. He wasn't here to compete against size or power. He was here to compete against himself. The starting lights blinked down, yellow, 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 asterisk green star. The race was on. Turbo shot forward. His legs moved in a blur of motion, faster than they ever had before. He was barely aware of the world around him, just the track beneath him, the wind rushing through his shell, the feeling of speed as it tore through his body. His mind couldn't process it fast enough, but he didn't need to think. He just moved. The other racers were already a few feet ahead, but it didn't matter. Turbo was closing the gap, faster and faster. His mind raced with every inch of the track he covered. The distant sound of engines faded as he focused only on the moment, on the feel of the pavement beneath his tiny legs and the surge of energy that pushed him forward. He was unstoppable. He darted between obstacles, cones, ramps, puddles of oil, slaloming in ways no one expected a snail to do. The crowd gasped as he shot ahead, leaving the modified vehicles in the dust. But it wasn't just the race he was winning. It was his life. It was the chance to prove that he, a small garden snail, could do something bigger than anyone could imagine. That he was more than just the joke he had been in the garden. He was Turbo, and no one could outrun him. Would you like to continue with Chapter 6, where Turbo faces greater challenges in the race, and his newfound fame begins to draw attention from unexpected places? Here's Chapter 5 of the novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013, picking up from the intense moment when Theo embraces his newfound speed and defies expectations. Turbo, 2013, a novel-style retelling. Chapter 5, The Road to Glory. The world felt different now. The hum of the city, the rumble of distant traffic, the chatter of the crowd, all of it seemed muffled as Theo hurtled down the cracked streets, faster than any snail had ever dared to go. His body was a blur, a streak of motion across the asphalt. He was weightless, his shell a shining blur that reflected the dim streetlights, his legs churning like pistons in an engine. Theo's heart thundered in his chest, and each breath came in sharp, quick bursts. He wasn't just racing, he was living in the moment. Every inch of pavement beneath him became his stage, every turn an opportunity to go faster, to prove to himself, and to the world, that he belonged here. Behind him, The crowd had exploded into a cacophony of cheers, whistles, shouts, the clatter of phones as they captured every second of this impossible feat, but none of it mattered to Theo. The only thing that mattered was the road ahead, the rhythm of the race, and the unrelenting pull of speed that now defined his existence. He wasn't just Theo anymore. He was Turbo. The wind in his face, the slick pavement beneath his body, it was a feeling like nothing he had ever known. He could feel the streets, the curves of the alleyways, the pull of gravity as he banked a sharp turn, leaning into the corner like a racer with years of experience. And for a moment, it was like time stood still. The rush, the acceleration, it was a blur of motion, of color, of light. He could taste the thrill of it, the freedom that came with every pulse of speed. In that moment, he wasn't just a snail, he was something greater. Back in the garage, the man who had questioned Theo earlier, the mechanic, watched, slack-jawed, as the little snail zipped around the lot, faster than any car, faster than any human, faster than any of the street racers in the crowd. His hands were frozen on the hood of the van, his sunglasses slipping down his nose as he tried to process what he was seeing. "This is insane," he muttered, still staring. A couple of the bystanders laughed nervously, shaking their heads. "I told you this guy was fast," one of them said. Another added, "I didn't think he meant that fast." But the mechanic was still focused on Theo. His eyes narrowed with curiosity and something else, something like admiration. "All right," he said, pulling himself from his trance. "Let's see if you can keep this up." With that, he ran toward the garage, shouting to his team, "Get the car ready! We've got a real racer on our hands." Back on the road, Theo felt the tension shift. He had been racing alone in his own world, but now he was being followed. His eyes darted behind him. The van. The mechanic wasn't going to let him go so easily. But for once, Theo wasn't afraid. He didn't flinch. Instead, he pushed harder. He gritted his teeth and surged forward, determined to stay ahead. The engine of the van roared to life, and Theo could hear the tires screeching as the mechanic revved the engine, clearly intent on testing the limits of this strange little snail. Theo's pulse quickened, but so did his speed. He shot forward, his shell catching the light of the street lamps as he zipped around corners, weaving between cars, dodging obstacles with an instinctual precision that felt as natural as breathing. But then, *screech*, the van was right behind him. Theo's heart skipped a beat. He'd have to push even harder. With a focused determination, he pulled to the side, darting around a parked truck, the van trailing close behind. He could feel the heat of the engine, the growl of the exhaust, the rumble in the air as it chased him down. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for, the test of his speed. His limits. His destiny. Theo took a deep breath, then shot forward with everything he had. He felt the wind rushing past him, the vibration of the asphalt in his body, and the van behind him, its engine screaming in pursuit. He was so close to the finish line now. The edge of the lot, the boundary where his race would end, but he wasn't thinking about that. No, he was thinking about one thing only: winning. With one final push, Theo blurred past the finish line, his body a streak of motion. The van slammed to a halt behind him, tires skidding as the mechanic grinned, his arms raised in astonishment. "That's what I'm talking about," the mechanic said, his voice filled with awe. Theo came to a stop a few feet away, panting hard, but not with exhaustion. No, it wasn't fatigue that held him now. It was something else, a deep satisfaction, a sense of fulfillment he had never known before. He had done it. He had won. He had outrun a machine, a car, a man. And for the first time, he knew exactly what he was capable of. The crowd that had gathered erupted into applause, cheering and whistling, their disbelief turning into admiration. Some shouted his name, others kept snapping pictures, but all of them shared the same expression of sheer amazement. Theo stood there, catching his breath, his heart racing faster than he ever thought possible. The mechanic stepped forward, wiping the sweat from his brow, a wide grin spreading across his face. "Well, well," he said. "Looks like we've got a new racer in town." Theo gave a small smile, a spark of something igniting in his chest. This wasn't just a race. This wasn't just a victory. This was the start of something much bigger. The crowd gathered around, all talking over each other, debating whether what they had just witnessed was even real. But it was real, all right. As real as the asphalt beneath their feet, as real as the race that had just unfolded before them. "I'm Turbo," Theo said, his voice calm, but filled with that new sense of purpose. "And I'm just getting started." Would you like to continue with Chapter 6? Here's Chapter 6 of the 100,000-word cinematic novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013. Chapter 6. The World Takes Notice. The race was nothing short of a blur. Turbo's body was a whirlwind of speed, his legs moving faster than he had ever imagined possible. He could barely keep up with the world around him, let alone process the fact that he was outpacing the largest, most powerful machines he had ever seen. Each movement, each twist and turn of his tiny form felt like it was being guided by something greater than himself. It wasn't just instinct. It was as if his entire being had become one with the road, the air, the very essence of speed. The crowd's cheers rang in his ears, but they were distant, like he was hearing them through a tunnel. His focus was sharp. The other racers, humans and machines alike, looked like slow-motion figures in the periphery of his vision. He didn't feel like a snail anymore. No. He felt like something else entirely, a force of nature. The finish line was just ahead, and his body screamed with energy, his tiny legs never tiring, never faltering. But as he neared the final stretch, a shadow loomed ahead. A giant, sleek black car, a souped-up street machine, shot forward, its turbocharged engine roaring as it pulled ahead of him. The crowd erupted into wild cheers, their voices blending together into one huge wave of sound. Turbo's heart pounded in his chest. He wasn't going to let this car, this machine, beat him. Not now, not when he was so close. With one last burst of speed, he pushed himself harder, his legs moving at an impossible pace, his shell flickering with a glow of untapped potential. It was neck and neck. The finish line was within reach. And then, he crossed its star. Turbo surged forward, his tiny body zipping past the finish line, ahead of the giant car by mere inches. The crowd went wild. But Turbo didn't slow down. He didn't stop. He kept moving, his legs a blur beneath him. He didn't want to hear the cheers or the applause. He just wanted to feel that rush, to feel the victory pulse through him like fire. He was unstoppable now. He had won. A split second later, he realized that the entire race had been a blur of sound and light, but now he could hear it clearly. The crowd's ecstatic roars filled the air, echoing across the parking lot. The roar of the engines slowly died down as the racers pulled to a stop, their tires screeching against the pavement. Turbo's victory felt almost unreal. He finally came to a stop, his tiny legs trembling as he slowed to a halt. The reality of what had just happened hit him like a tidal wave. He had won a race. Not just any race, but one of the fastest, most dangerous street races. He, a garden snail, had beaten human competitors and roaring machines. He couldn't believe it. It felt like something out of a dream. He barely had time to process the enormity of his accomplishment before a voice broke through the haze of his thoughts. "That's my boy. You did it." The voice belonged to the racer, the man who had given him a chance. He was grinning from ear to ear, clearly proud of Turbo's performance. "You were amazing out there. Turbo is a real champion." But the shout of praise was lost in the loud buzz of something else. Something that wasn't cheering. Something more calculated, more deliberate. "Hold up!" a voice from the other side of the crowd yelled. "Hold up, everyone! We got a situation here." The sudden shift in the atmosphere caught everyone's attention. The cheers died down as people began murmuring in confusion. The crowd parted as a black SUV rolled into the lot, its tinted windows obscuring the figure inside. The car slowly came to a stop, and the door opened with an almost eerie quietness. Out stepped a man in a sharp suit, his face expressionless, his posture stiff and professional. He looked like he belonged to a world far removed from street racing, a world of power and influence. Behind him, two other figures, larger, more imposing, followed closely, scanning the area as though they were there on business. Turbo's heart skipped a beat. The man in the suit didn't waste any time. His cold gaze swept across the racers, lingering on Turbo for a moment longer than necessary. "You," he said, pointing directly at Turbo. His voice was sharp, authoritative. "I want to talk to you." The crowd murmured in confusion. Some of the racers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't just any stranger. This was someone with power, someone who could change everything. Turbo's racing adrenaline was still pumping through his veins, but a wave of unease swept over him. Something told him that the man in the suit wasn't here for congratulations. The man slowly walked over to where Turbo was resting on the workbench. His eyes locked onto the snail with an unsettling intensity. "You've got quite the talent," the man said, his tone calculated. "That little stunt you just pulled? Impressive. But it's not enough to just race around for fun. We can offer you real opportunities. Big money. Big fame. All you have to do is sign on the dotted line." The man pulled a glossy contract out of his briefcase and placed it on the workbench. It looked too neat, too perfect, like a trap that had been carefully laid out for someone, or something like Turbo. Turbo recoiled instinctively, his heart thumping faster now. He had come here for one thing, to race. But now, he was faced with something he couldn't have predicted. The corporate world **, with its slick promises and shiny contracts. "No thanks," Turbo said, his voice steady despite the tension that had suddenly filled the air. The man in the suit raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "I think you'll change your mind when you see the offer. We can make you a star, the star of the racing world." But Turbo had heard enough. His instincts told him that something was off about this. The man wasn't here to help him, he was here to control him. "I don't need you to make me a star," Turbo said firmly, looking up at the man with a new sense of resolve. "I'm already a star." Without waiting for a response, Turbo turned and shot off the workbench, zipping toward the open road. He wasn't about to let anyone control him. Not now. Not ever. The crowd parted as he sped by, and the man in the suit's expression darkened with frustration. But it didn't matter. Turbo was already racing toward his future, and nothing, no one, was going to stand in his way. Would you like to continue with Chapter 7, where Turbo learns more about the business side of racing and faces challenges that could either make or break him? Here's Chapter 6 of the novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013, following the aftermath of Theo's victory and the impact it has on his journey towards something greater. Turbo, 2013, a novel-style retelling. Chapter 6, The Pit Stop. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but Theo remained rooted to the spot. The adrenaline that had once surged through him now began to ebb away, leaving a buzzing satisfaction behind. The night air was cool against his shell, but it couldn't cool the fire that burned within him. He had done it. He had beaten a van. A car. But that wasn't the end. No, far from it. That was just the beginning. The start of something much, much bigger. He could feel it deep in his core. The mechanic, still grinning ear to ear, walked over to Theo, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're something else, buddy," the mechanic said, his voice filled with awe. "I've seen a lot of fast things in my time, but never anything like that." Theo didn't respond at first. Instead, he turned his gaze back toward the road, the asphalt stretching out before him like an endless ribbon of possibility. His thoughts drifted to the race, the feeling of the wind whipping past him, the power in his legs, the way his shell had caught the light as he sped past the finish line. It wasn't just the speed. It was the freedom. "Turbo, huh?" the mechanic continued, nudging him gently. "I like it. Got a ring to it. But what now?" Theo blinked, pulling himself from his thoughts. The mechanic's question hung in the air for a moment. What now? The truth was, Theo didn't know. He didn't know where he was headed or what was coming next. He didn't have a plan. He didn't even have a map. All he knew was that he couldn't go back to the slow, monotonous life of a garden snail. Not anymore. He had tasted what it was like to be fast, to be alive in a way he'd never imagined before. "I'm not sure," Theo said quietly, almost to himself. "But I know one thing." The mechanic raised an eyebrow. "I'm going to race. I'm going to be the fastest there's ever been." The mechanic chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah. And what about the rest of us? You think you can keep up with the big leagues, little guy?" Theo's eyes narrowed, the spark of determination flaring again. "I don't need to keep up with anyone. I just need to be fast." The mechanic studied him for a long moment before breaking into a grin. "All right, Turbo. You've got guts. I respect that. Maybe you can do this." He turned and motioned toward the van. "Come on, let's get you set up. We'll give you a proper pit stop. If you're serious about this, you're going to need all the help you can get." Theo hesitated for a moment before nodding. There was no going back now. The road was calling to him, and he was ready to answer. The inside of the garage smelled like motor oil, rubber, and something else, something unfamiliar to Theo. It was the scent of machines, of speed, of racing. The walls were lined with car parts and tools, each one more intricate than the last. A far cry from the simple tomato patch he had once called home. The mechanic led him over to a workbench, where a team of racers were already gathered, their eyes lighting up at the sight of the snail. "Well, well, look who's here," one of them said, a young woman with a patchwork jacket and a cap pulled low over her eyes. "Didn't think I'd ever see the day when a snail outruns a car." Theo didn't know how to respond. He had never been around humans, or other racers, like this before. It felt surreal, this place full of noise and speed. But it also felt like home. "Don't worry, buddy," another man said, walking over with a tool in hand. "We've seen stranger things. You just hang tight while we get you set up." Theo watched, wide-eyed, as they moved around him with precision and purpose, setting up ramps and adjusting mechanisms. He was just a small snail, but in this space, among these people, he felt like he mattered. "This is it, huh?" Theo asked, his voice full of awe. "The real deal?" The young woman smiled. "You bet. We've got a big race coming up, a real tournament. And we could use someone with your talents." Theo's heart skipped a beat. A tournament. A real race. "I'm in," he said, without hesitation. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The mechanics outfitted Theo with a customized racing shell, reinforced and sleek. The team made sure he had everything he needed to go faster, tiny modifications, tweaks to his form, all designed to enhance his already remarkable speed. They even gave him a small helmet, just for the added effect of the full racing experience. As they worked, Theo could feel the weight of their expectations settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about speed anymore. This was about proving himself. To everyone. To himself. At the edge of the garage, the mechanic stood watching, arms crossed over his chest. "You sure you're ready for this, little guy?" he asked, his voice softer now, almost like a father to his new protege. Theo looked up, determination blazing in his eyes. "I was born ready." The next day, Theo stood at the starting line of the race, his heart pounding in his chest. The track stretched out before him, winding and twisting like a serpent in the desert, with obstacles and jumps that would challenge even the most seasoned racers. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the dusty track, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the race. The other competitors, a mix of human racers, robots, and even some speed-crazed animals, lined up alongside him, their vehicles roaring with anticipation. Theo was the smallest, the least expected, but in his heart, he knew something they didn't. This was his moment, and nothing was going to stop him. The mechanic's voice crackled over a speaker. "All right, Turbo, you ready? It's go time." Theo nodded, settling into position, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline course through him. The starting flag waved in the distance, and in that moment, everything clicked. This wasn't just a race. This was his destiny. As the flag dropped, Theo shot forward with a burst of speed, the world around him blurring as he surged ahead. The race had begun. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 7? Here's Chapter 7 of the 100,000-word cinematic novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013. Chapter 7. The Price of Fame. Turbo didn't stop racing. Not even for a second. The sound of his tiny legs scraping the pavement was drowned out by the roar of engines, the hum of tires spinning in the distance. The air was thick with the smell of burnt rubber and exhaust fumes, the smell of victory. But it wasn't just victory that Turbo was chasing anymore. It was something deeper, something more elusive. It was the freedom that came with winning, the freedom to be something no one thought possible. But even freedom had its price. The road ahead was still dark, the streetlights flickering in the night. The lights from the crowd were dimming as he made his way toward the outskirts of the city, the echoes of the race still resonating in his ears. He had outrun everything. The machines, the humans, the expectations. But there was something about the race that gnawed at him now. The man in the suit, the glossy contract, the offers of fame and fortune. Turbo had no time to dwell on that now, though. He had bigger things to focus on. He had to keep moving, keep pushing. But the world around him was changing. Fast. It wasn't long before Turbo found himself at the edge of a neon-lit stretch of highway, the kind of road that ran through the underbelly of the city, where the shadows were deeper and the stakes were higher. The air here was different, thicker, heavier, as though the weight of the city itself pressed down on you. And as Turbo skidded to a stop near an abandoned warehouse, he felt the tension in his shell. His phone buzzed in his pocket. His new racing number, a temporary ID, blinking on the screen. Asterisk, "Hey Turbo, where you at? You're hot right now. We need to talk. Big deal coming up." Asterisk. It was the voice of Chet, the man who had first noticed Turbo's raw speed. Chet had been a key player in the street racing scene, the one who saw Turbo's potential from the beginning, who had been the first to take him under his wing. But Turbo wasn't sure what kind of big deal Chet was talking about. The whole world was suddenly interested in him, in his speed, and that brought its own set of complications. Turbo didn't respond right away. He wasn't sure he wanted to answer. He wasn't sure if he was ready to get pulled into something bigger, something that could end up controlling him, just like the man in the suit had tried to do. But there was something inside him that urged him to take the call. Maybe it was the need for validation, or the hunger to push himself further. Maybe it was the sense that he wasn't quite done with this world yet. So, with a deep breath, he hit answer. "Chet," Turbo's voice was steady, his mind sharp. "What's this all about?" Well, looks like you've made quite the impression, Turbo," Chet's voice crackled with excitement over the phone. "I'm talking about real money, fame, and the kind of sponsorship deals that could put you at the top of the racing world. Think about it, a snail, racing on the streets, taking down machines like they're nothing. That's a headline story in the making." Turbo's pulse quickened. The rush of the race was still fresh in his veins, but this felt different. This wasn't about racing for fun anymore. This wasn't about him anymore. This was about a brand, an image, and a contract that could shape his entire future. "I don't know, Chet," Turbo muttered. "I didn't come here for that." "Listen to me," Chet's voice lowered, a hint of seriousness creeping in. "You've got the talent, the speed. There's no denying it. You can be bigger than any of these racers. People are already calling you a legend. But legends don't just race for fun. They sell their name. They become icons." Turbo paused, the wheels in his mind turning. He'd always wanted to be someone who defied expectations, someone who could prove that a garden snail could do something more than just slither slowly across the ground. But was fame the answer? Was it what he really wanted? "I don't want to be a gimmick," Turbo finally said, his voice thick with uncertainty. "I don't want to be just another trick or stunt. I want to race because I love it." "I get it," Chet's tone softened, but there was still that edge of persuasion. "But love doesn't pay the bills. And in the racing world, success is about more than just passion. It's about business, power. You want to make history. You want to go down as the fastest snail in the world? Then you have to think bigger." Turbo's thoughts were interrupted by the roar of another engine, its sound low and menacing, cutting through the night. He looked up to see a shadow moving toward him, its silhouette outlined by the dim streetlights. Another figure in the racing world had arrived. "Hold on, Chet," Turbo muttered, setting the phone down. The figure was unmistakable, a bright red, sleek car with chrome accents, glowing under the streetlights. It wasn't a racer, it was a machine built for a different kind of world. A world Turbo had no desire to be part of. The car pulled to a stop in front of him, its engine still idling. The door swung open, revealing the driver, a tall man in a designer jacket, his sunglasses obscuring his eyes despite the darkness of the night. "Turbo, right?" The man's voice was smooth, calculating. "I've been hearing a lot about you. You've got quite the following, don't you?" Turbo stood his ground, sensing the air shift again. It was clear that this man was no ordinary street racer. I don't need followers, Turbo replied, trying to sound confident, but feeling the pressure of the situation. Ah, but you will, my friend. You see, we've got big plans for you, the man said, his smile a little too smooth. I'm from the Global Racing Federation. Ever heard of it? Of course you have. Everyone has. And we want you. The fastest snail in the world? We'd be crazy not to sign you up. Turbo's heart raced as the words hung in the air. Global Racing Federation? This was bigger than anything he had ever imagined. The man's tone was persuasive, almost hypnotic, like he was laying out a path for Turbo to walk, a path he hadn't even considered. But this wasn't the world Turbo had signed up for. This wasn't racing for the love of speed, it was a business, a machine. I'm not interested, Turbo said, his voice firm. I don't race for that kind of stuff. The man chuckled, an amused look crossing his face. Well, if you change your mind, you know where to find me. We can make you a star. Bigger than you've ever imagined. With that, he climbed back into the car and sped off, leaving a trail of dust behind him. Turbo stood there, still, the weight of the decision settling on him like a heavy shell. He had come here to race, to push himself beyond the limits. But now it was clear, the world was looking at him, wanting him to fit into a mold he wasn't sure he wanted to fill. The path ahead was clouded with choices. Fame, money, control. But none of it felt like the thing Turbo had truly come for. As he revved up his legs and took off into the night, one thing was clear, the race was far from over. Would you like to continue with Chapter 8, where Turbo faces even tougher challenges and the pressure of the spotlight begins to take a toll on him? Here's Chapter 7 of the novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013, diving deeper into Theo's journey as he faces the challenges of the race and the inner battle between his limits and his determination. Turbo, 2013, a novel-style retelling. Chapter 7, The Velocity of Dreams. The world blurred into a whirlwind of colors and sounds as Theo shot forward, his tiny legs propelling him faster than anything around him. The track stretched out like an unyielding path, winding through desert sand and jagged rocks, but for the first time in his life, the obstacles felt manageable. Every curve, every jump, was an opportunity to prove himself, to defy the natural laws that governed him. His speed was his rebellion, his defiance. The roar of engines behind him made his heart pound, the sound a distant but steady reminder of what was at stake. Humans and machines raced alongside him, but none of them seemed to have the focus he did. None of them seemed to feel the urgency that burned through his veins. His thoughts, as always, turned back to the dream of speed, of freedom, of being more than just a snail. This is it, he thought. This is who I am. Behind him, the competition was fierce. A robot on wheels, sleek and silver, whizzed past him, its metallic frame cutting through the air like a blade. Theo gritted his teeth. He could hear the whirring of its engines as it pulled ahead, its artificial intelligence calculating every move with perfect precision. But Theo didn't need precision. He needed heart. The track swerved to the left, and Theo leaned into it, his body instinctively mimicking the moves he'd seen on TV, the moves that had once seemed impossible. His shell hummed with energy as he zoomed through the bend, the wind rushing past him, making the air taste sweet and freeing. Just ahead, a human driver in a souped-up car swerved dangerously, pushing his vehicle to the limit as it careened around a corner. Theo could see the desperation in the driver's eyes. They were all driven by the same need, to win, to be the fastest, to claim glory. But for Theo, the race wasn't about winning in the traditional sense. It was about proving that he could belong, in a world of speed, a world where he had always been left behind. The first jump loomed ahead, and Theo's heart skipped a beat. It was the kind of jump that made even the bravest pause for a moment. A high ramp, with a steep incline that promised to send competitors soaring through the air, their vehicles flying in defiance of gravity. Theo didn't hesitate. He pushed harder, his legs a blur beneath him, his body slingshotting toward the ramp. The ground tilted beneath him, and for a brief moment, the world went silent, as if the universe was holding its breath. He launched. The air rushed around him, filling his shell with a sensation of weightlessness. The ground disappeared beneath him, and for a heartbeat, Theo was free. His body felt light, unbound, and in that moment, he wasn't just a snail. He was a force of nature, defying physics, defying destiny. But then gravity reclaimed him. Theo landed with a sharp thud, his shell scraping the ground, but he didn't falter. He recovered, his momentum carrying him forward, every muscle in his body screaming in exhilaration. He could hear the engines of his competitors approaching, but the distance between them was growing. Slowly but surely, they were falling behind. A voice crackled in his ear, the mechanic's voice, calm but filled with awe. "That was impressive, Turbo. You're holding your own out there." Theo's chest swelled with pride, but he didn't allow himself to revel in it for long. The next section of the track was ahead, a series of sharp turns that required precise timing and focus. He wasn't about to let up now. The competition was fierce, but Theo was relentless. The sharp turns came one after another, and each time, he powered through them with instinctual grace. The other racers, no matter how fast or how powerful their machines, couldn't keep up with his natural agility. The sun beat down on the track, its heat pressing against Theo's small frame, but it didn't bother him. The excitement of the race, the rush of wind against his face, the hum of his shell as he sped forward, drove him forward with an intensity that didn't fade. But then, a flash of light caught his eye. A blur of red and chrome, a figure speeding toward him from the corner of the track. It was the same silver robot from before, and this time, it wasn't holding back. It closed in on Theo, its wheels spinning with a mechanical precision that made his heart race. The robot wasn't just fast, it was relentless. It darted forward, its sensors locking in on Theo's every move, calculating the perfect angle to overtake him. Theo gritted his teeth. He was faster. He had to be faster. The robot's whirring grew louder, but Theo didn't flinch. He focused on the next turn ahead, his mind shifting into a zone where nothing else mattered. No machine, no car, no competitor, just him and the track. The turn was tight, and Theo swung into it, his tiny legs pumping faster than they ever had before. The robot followed, but its sharp cornering wasn't enough. Theo surged ahead, pushing his speed to its limits. The finish line was within sight, a ribbon of light on the horizon, just barely visible beyond the dust and fumes that hung in the air. The final stretch of the race awaited, and Theo knew that every ounce of energy he had left needed to be poured into this one last push. The robot and the car were on his tail, but he didn't care. He was almost there. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was no fear. No hesitation. Only speed. He surged forward, his body a blur of motion, his shell cutting through the wind. The finish line loomed closer, and Theo could feel it now, the triumph, the victory, the impossible becoming reality. With one final burst of energy, he crossed the line. The crowd erupted in a deafening cheer. The world around him exploded with noise, but all Theo could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat. The roar of the engines faded into nothing, replaced by the overwhelming sense of accomplishment. He had done it. He had won. The mechanic's voice crackled in his ear, filled with astonishment. "You did it, Turbo. You actually did it." Theo looked up, his eyes bright with the realization of what he had just achieved. He wasn't just a snail. He wasn't just fast. He was a racer. The crowd's cheers swelled around him, but Theo's focus remained fixed on one thing, the road ahead. Because the real race was just beginning. Would you like to continue with Chapter 8? Here's Chapter 8 of the 100,000-word cinematic novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013. Chapter 8. The Weight of the Spotlight. The next few days were a blur. Turbo couldn't escape the relentless press of the spotlight, no matter how fast he went. It was as if the world had become a series of flashing cameras, bright lights, and hovering microphones. Everywhere he went, there were whispers, eyes, and expectations. He could feel the weight of it all, pressing down on his tiny shell like a 1,000-pound boulder. It wasn't just the global racing world that was watching anymore, it was the world itself. People recognized him on the street. Everywhere he went, there were fans, street racers, even little kids, calling out his name. "Turbo! Turbo! You're the fastest snail in the world!" It felt strange, surreal. This wasn't the quiet life he had imagined when he had started racing. This was something else entirely. Something bigger. And somehow, it didn't feel as sweet as he had hoped. He had always dreamed of racing for the pure thrill of it, of feeling the wind against his shell, the speed in his veins, the excitement of just being alive as he zipped across the asphalt. But now, racing felt like a business. The cameras, the contracts, the endless demands. It was as if the joy of the sport had been replaced by a machine, something calculated, something carefully orchestrated. It wasn't long before Turbo received another call. This time, it was Chet again, his voice as urgent as ever. "Turbo, we've got a big deal coming up," Chet said, his voice tight with excitement. "The Global Racing Federation is serious. They want you in the next big race. This is it, man, the one that will define you. You could be the face of the sport." Turbo felt a tight knot form in his stomach. The words hung in the air like a threat. The pressure to perform, to be everything they wanted him to be, was growing unbearable. "I don't know, Chet," Turbo said, his voice unsure. "I didn't sign up for all this." Chet didn't skip a beat. "I get it. But listen, this is what you wanted, right? You've got the speed, the talent. But now, you've got to back it up. You've got to show the world you're not just a fluke." Turbo took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "But what about me, Chet? What about racing because it feels right? What about doing it for me?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Look, kid," Chet finally said, his tone shifting. "I know this isn't what you imagined, but this is how it works. You think anyone gets to the top by just doing what they want? No. You've got to play the game. You've got to show them that you're the best. And you are. You've already proven that. Now, it's time to step up." Turbo felt the weight of those words settle on him like a heavy burden. Was he ready to take that step? Was he ready to give up everything he had wanted, his love for racing, the simple joy of the road, in exchange for fame, money, and the crushing demands of the racing industry? He didn't know. He hung up the phone with a sigh, glancing around his tiny makeshift home. It wasn't much, just a small, run-down corner of the city, tucked away behind a row of crumbling buildings. But it had been his sanctuary, a place where he could rest, think, and be himself. But now it felt more like a prison. The weight of the expectations, the demands from the world, had begun to suffocate him. Racing wasn't fun anymore. It wasn't the escape it used to be. The world wanted him to be something he wasn't. A few days later, the tension reached its peak. Turbo stood at the starting line, surrounded by the sleekest, most powerful machines he had ever seen. The crowd was massive, a sea of faces that looked at him with awe, their eyes full of hope and expectation. This wasn't just a race. It was the race, the one Chet had been talking about. The one that would define his career, make him the superstar he had always dreamed of becoming. But as he stood there, on the edge of the track, the familiar hum of engines vibrating through the pavement, something inside Turbo began to shift. The pressure, the crowd, the cameras, they were all too much. He felt like a tiny insect on the verge of being swallowed by the magnitude of it all. "Are you ready, Turbo?" Chet's voice came through his earpiece, but it felt distant now, like a stranger's voice from a far-off place. Turbo didn't respond right away. His legs shook beneath him, the familiar rush of speed replaced by a deep, gnawing anxiety. What if he didn't make it? What if he wasn't good enough? What if the world was expecting too much from him? The race started. But it wasn't the same. Turbo zipped forward, his legs moving faster than he could think, but the thrill, the joy, wasn't there. He was moving on autopilot, his body doing the work while his mind raced with doubts. The crowd roared in approval, but all Turbo could hear was the pounding of his own heart, his breath shallow and uneven. The machines ahead of him were powerful, sleek, everything that he wasn't. And yet, there he was, racing alongside them, fighting for his place in a world that seemed to be growing more foreign with every passing second. As the race went on, Turbo began to falter. The tension in his shell weighed him down, slowing him just enough to lose his rhythm. The machines ahead of him pulled further away, and with every passing second, Turbo felt the distance between him and the finish line grow. He couldn't focus anymore. His legs weren't moving as fast as before, his thoughts clouded with uncertainty. The voices from the crowd, the cameras flashing, they all became a blur. And then, something inside him snapped. Turbo veered off the track, pulling himself to the side of the road. He couldn't do this. Not anymore. He was done. He didn't want the fame, the money, the spotlight. He didn't want to be a star if it meant losing the one thing he had loved about racing in the first place: the freedom. The pure joy of moving fast without the weight of the world on his back. With a deep breath, he turned around and headed for the exit, his legs moving as fast as they could. He didn't care about the race. He didn't care about the contract, the sponsors, the expectations. All that mattered was that he was finally, truly, racing for himself. Would you like to continue with Chapter 9, where Turbo decides to forge his own path and faces the consequences of his choice? Here's Chapter 8 of the novel-style retelling of Turbo, 2013, where Theo faces new challenges and the realization that his victory comes with new obstacles and choices. Turbo, 2013, a novel-style retelling. Chapter 8, The Price of Speed. The celebration was nothing like Theo had imagined. The cheers of the crowd, the flashing lights, the camera crews zooming in on every angle, it was all so much, so overwhelming, like a storm suddenly crashing into his world. But it wasn't the kind of storm that left destruction in its wake. No, this storm felt like it was full of possibilities, full of new directions. But there was something about the victory that didn't sit right. The roars of the crowd were fading into a distant hum, and for the first time in a long while, Theo's mind wandered beyond the trophy and the fame that came with it. The track was behind him now, but ahead lay a path that wasn't so clearly defined. He had won, yes, but what came after? As the camera flashes slowed and the crowd began to disperse, Theo's body still hummed with the rush of the race. The feeling hadn't completely worn off, but a creeping sense of uncertainty was starting to take hold. "Turbo! Turbo! Over here!" A voice called out, pulling Theo from his thoughts. He turned, startled, and found a group of reporters rushing toward him. They were armed with microphones, their faces eager with anticipation. Theo smiled nervously, his thoughts racing. Was this really happening? The lead reporter, a woman with sharp eyes and a bright smile, asked him the question everyone wanted to know. "Theo, what does winning the biggest race of your life mean to you?" He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come out right away. What did it mean? Was it just the culmination of years of dreaming? Was it just a testament to how hard he had worked, how far he had pushed himself? Or was there something more to it? Theo began slowly, his voice still shaky with the aftershocks of the race. It means I'm not just a snail anymore. I'm more than that." The reporter smiled, sensing the emotional weight of his words. "You've proven that anyone can achieve greatness, no matter their size. But now that you've reached the top, what's next?" That was the question that had been gnawing at Theo ever since he crossed the finish line. What was next? What could possibly come next when you've already defied the odds in a way no one ever thought possible? Before he could answer, a familiar voice cut through the air. "That's enough, kid." It was Chet, Theo's brother, striding toward him with a scowl on his face. He pushed past the reporters, clearly uncomfortable with the attention on Theo. "He's not here for a circus. He's here for the next race, right?" The reporters exchanged looks, but they were already moving on to the next story. Chet didn't seem to care. His focus was on Theo, and his expression was tight, as if he had something important to say. "Chet, No more speeches, Theo. We've got work to do," Chet interrupted, his voice low, almost irritated. "You may have won today, but that doesn't mean you're done. There's a lot more ahead of you, and you're gonna have to keep pushing. Keep proving yourself." Theo blinked, surprised by the harshness in his brother's tone. "Chet, I don't get it. I thought you'd be happy for me. You saw what I did out there. I actually won." "I'm not saying you didn't," Chet muttered, glancing away for a moment. "But winning one race doesn't change everything. You've got a reputation now, and people expect more. You've got to live up to it." The weight of his words pressed down on Theo's chest, heavier than any victory lap or applause. Was he really ready for this? Was he ready to face the pressure of being something more than just a snail, someone who had set an impossible standard for himself? The world had changed for Theo, but not all of it was the way he had imagined it. He hadn't expected the feeling of loneliness that came with fame, the unease that settled in his stomach as he realized just how much pressure he had put on himself to keep going, to keep winning. "Chet, I can handle it." "I know I can," Theo said, his voice more confident than he felt. "I've made it this far." You've made it this far, but you're not done. Chet's eyes softened for a moment, but the skepticism never fully left his gaze. The world doesn't slow down for anyone. Not even for you. Before Theo could reply, a loud voice echoed from across the pit. Turbo! You ready for the next race? The mechanic, who had been a silent supporter throughout the entire race, called over to Theo, his face filled with enthusiasm. Theo turned, surprised to find a glimmer of hope in his chest. Yes, he was ready for the next race. It was a part of him now, the rush of it, the thrill. It was in his blood. But as he stood there, looking at the race car engines being prepped for the next round of competitors, something shifted within him. The track had given him everything, and yet it was also beginning to take something away. Something intangible. He couldn't help but wonder, what happens when the dream becomes the job? Theo's thoughts lingered on that question as he prepared for the next race. The fame, the pressure, the constant chase of something bigger, it was exhilarating, but it was also draining. His dream was no longer just about speed. It was about the weight of expectation, the need to keep up, the hunger for more. As the starting lights for the next round flashed, Theo stepped forward, his legs moving of their own accord. He knew he couldn't stop now, not after everything he'd done to get here. The world was watching, and so he put on his shell, ready for the race, ready for the fight ahead. But somewhere deep inside, Theo knew that this victory, and the next one, and the next, would come with a price. And he wasn't sure if he was ready to pay it. Would you like to continue with Chapter 9?